Hey everybody, how you doing? Tom Barnas here. Stories from the 78. I truly love that I get to do this. And this is a love and a passion that goes back 20 years from me. I'm talking about a kid listening to the radio, listening to WGN Cubs games, listening to Q101. Back in the day, B96 radio was my first love. So if you could subscribe and keep the dream rolling for me on this Story from the 78 podcast and vlog, I would appreciate it. One of my stops in my radio career before television and now digital was WGN radio. I fell in love with everything about it working there. It was the powerhouse of powerhouse stations when I was there. It was number one, king of the hill. It kicked everybody's ass type of radio station. It had the Cubs, and I think they just got the Blackhawks at the time. It was wonderful to work there. And I was like a fill-in producer here and there and everywhere, right? I filled in for producers on the Steve Cochran show, Spike Odell in the morning. I mean, I'm talking about Mitch Rosenberg at night. And eventually I landed behind the glass with one Nick Digilio. Fantastic human being. He loves Chicago, perhaps maybe more than I do. And I love Chicago. But I like to point out in his book, which we're going to talk to him about now, 40 years, 40 films, Nick Digilio, about the author section at the end. It's so Nick, if you know what I mean, if you know what I mean. But it reads in part, oh, and Nick loves Chicago and everything about it. I mean, I've said that in so many ways where I'm like, I even love the traffic. You know what? Because I'd rather be in this city than any other city. So I'm excited to talk to Nick about the 40 years, 40 films book that he has that kind of encapsulates his time at WGN and beyond. He was there for 35 years at WGN. And then 2020 happened. We'll get into all of that, but how this book is not just about movies, but an autobiographical account of his life weaved in to his passion and his love of movies. I only hope one day that I can write something this great. Nick, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. It has been a long time, a while back, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think over 10 years at least. Yeah, no, definitely over 10 years. I mean,
Yeah.
it was before they screwed it all up.
Well, yeah. They screwed it all up around, I don't know, 5 years ago, I think it was. Around more than that, a little bit more than 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Let's say 6 years ago, they started to screw
Yeah.
it up.
I was there in the run when the Cubs were the first round when the Cubs were good, but not good enough, like 2007, 08.
Yeah.
But they were really excited about the Cubs, and I was there at WGN when they were broadcasting still on WGN with the Cubs games and Sano, or not. Was Sano? No,
Yeah.
no Sano. Was Sano?
Oh, yeah. Santa was in
right.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, just fond memories of that old place. And you had a few years on me there, by like 32 more years. 35 in total. Were you there?
I was there for 1985 is when I started. So I mean, and then I was canned in 2000. So yeah, 35 years. Oh, it was just over 35 years that I was with WG.
And then you went off and you did some other things. You're doing podcasting. You're hosting movie nights at a theater out in Oak Park,
Right.
and you've done Second City, stand up. You've done 100 things, and you kind of crammed it all into this book that you came out with. And I'll throw it up here, but I have a graphic. But I mean, 40 years, 40 films. Nick Digilio.
I have a copy of it too.
Oh, so, fantastic! Look at that. We're both radio guys doing our thing.
About that. Look at that. I put it all in the book. I mean, I've done a ton of stuff, and I've always wanted to, like, I've always just been a nonstop talker. All I do is just, I can't tell you the number of times people just tell me to shut up, and over the years, and it's just blah 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 blah. And I've always loved comedy, and I've always loved entertaining people. And it's always been, like in me. And then, but movies have been the lifeblood. Like, it's the one constant in my life has been movies. And so, I've done a lot of stuff over the years: the radio, the stage stuff, the theater, storefront theater, writing, directing, acting, and doing comedy and all that stuff. But the one thing that's always been the mainstay is that I've loved movies, and I've started reviewing movies. I mean, even when I was a little kid, I was a movie freak and all that stuff. So yeah, I decided to put it all in a book after many years 40 years professionally. But I'm 60. I turned 60 this year.
Come on.
No, I did. I
Already?
know. It's hard to believe. Yeah, no, I know it's hard to believe. But I turned 60 this year, and it was a year of kind of there's a lot of stuff has changed over the past few years. in my life, and I've been thinking about writing this and pushing myself to write it, and then it wasn't really until my girlfriend Julie, who is a major contributor to this book getting done, when she finally said, "Look, just get off your ass and do it, man. Do it already. You talk about doing it, just do it." And if I didn't have her to like push me, I probably would have delayed it even further. But turning 60, that's a big age, and hitting 40 years as a professional film critic seemed like the right time. You know what I mean? It seemed like a good round number, to put down and write a memoir, and that's kind of what it is. It's like a memoir that is loaded with 40 movie reviews and more. So.
I know. I love the way you compose the book with your reviews, and then you have your top 10 of the year, and you have these little snippets of your life throughout, kind of where you were, what was going on. And I love one of the ones when you saw the first Halloween movie at the Chicago theater, I believe with your dad,
My dad, yeah.
and how that changed your life.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was November of 1978. It was the weekend the movie opened. I saw it the Sunday that it opened. My father and I used to. My father used to take me downtown to the Chicago Loop, and this was in the days. We started going in the late 60s, in the early 70s, big time. And in
So they
those
still played
days,
movies. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
As they still played movies at those theaters.
Yes,
Yeah.
they did. Well, those theaters were there. They're not there anymore. The Block 37, that whole Block 37 mall there, that used to actually contain, around the corner and down the street, there were 3 major theaters that took up that space. Now it's just Block 37. There are theaters inside, but it's not that.
I know the irony of it all, huh?
It is, right, yeah. And then, the theaters that were down there was the Chicago Theater, which is still there, which, by the way, as we're recording this, I will be in that building in a few hours because I'm going to see Patti Smith tonight.
Very cool.
Theater. So, but anyway, the Chicago Theater, across the street was the State Lake.
Yep.
And down on State Street, there was also the Loop. There was the Roosevelt, which for some reason was my favorite. Around the corner was the United Artists of the Woods. There was the Mickey Vickers. There was the Michael Todd. There was, if you liked adult movies, there was the CineStage. There were even movie theaters inside the Marina Tower.
Were they really?
Yeah.
Well, the House of Blues used to be an old bowling alley, right?
Yeah, that was a bowling alley, and the theaters were inside as well. And the idea of Marina Towers was you never have to leave. That was the idea. There were grocery stores, there's bowling alleys, there's movie theaters. The idea was to just be a hermit for the rest of your life, which I kind of like. But anyway, all those theaters were there, and every Sunday morning, my father and I would get up and we'd either jump on I lived in the greenhouse right next to the Addison Brown Line stop. Like literally, you can still see it. If you're walking down Addison, next to the Brown Line stop, there's a greenhouse on that second floor. That's where I grew up. And so we would either jump on the train and go downtown, or we'd jump in the car and we'd drive down. And he would take me to whatever was playing at the theaters. And there were no rules in my house about what was appropriate, what was inappropriate to watch. I was watching completely inappropriate movies at a very, very young age. There were never rules about how late I could stay up or what I could watch on TV.
Well, that's a dream.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a result, I ended up seeing a lot of movies that no kid under the age of 13 should have seen. So by the time I saw Halloween, we had gone down there every Sunday. So there were like kung fu triple features and blaxploitation movies and stuff like that. So I saw like Dolomite and Shaft and all of the blaxploitation movies, and then all the kung fu movies, the Bruce Lee movies, the Bruce Lee ripoffs, all of that stuff, and then major movies as well. So by the time Halloween came out in November of 1978, and we went down to the Chicago Theater, it was by this point it was a natural thing. It was habitual, and I had seen a million horror movies, and they were my favorite genre. But I remember seeing Halloween, and we're watching the movie, and I'm amazed by it. I was just stunned by it. It's still one of my favorite movies of all time. And and I remember at that time, and I'd seen a million movies by that point at the age of 13. That was the first time I ever thought I knew what a director did. Like I watched it and I went, wait a minute. I think, because I would read credits and not know what the hell they meant. I didn't know what a cinematographer was or what a producer did or whatever.
Right.
But by this point I was like, wow. And then I remember walking out of the Chicago Theater and going over and looking out at the posters. They used to have posters outside of movie theaters, in the big marquees. And I actively looked for the director's name, and it said directed by John Carpenter, and that was it. It changed me, and at that point, I dove into on my own, like researching and looking up what directors do, and reading about
Mm.
directors, and going
This is
back and looking up, all the legendary directors of all time, foreign directors, everything. I mean, John Ford, Akira Kurosawa, Scorsese, Coppola, all of the directors, and then I realized what a director did, and that's when cinema became the thing for me, and it was Halloween that did that.
Yeah, and I imagine not as easy as it is now to look things up. You had to go to the library back in the
I did.
day
Yes,
and
I
just
did. I
sit
had
there
to go to
for
the library.
hours.
Yeah, and look through, the Dewey Decimal system and do the cards and stuff, and also microfilm.
Oh yeah.
People might not remember what that is, but there was this thing called microfilm, and you would sit in front of a giant screen and you would scroll through it to old newspapers or old books and things like that. And then, but yeah, I mean, that's what I did in 1978. I dove into it, man, and I looked up any piece of history or any information I could find from any directors. I mean, I'm talking foreign directors like Bergman and Godard and Fellini and all that stuff. Like, Halloween opened the floodgates for me, and that's when I started to make a list of every movie that I saw and give it a star rating. All of that started in 1978.
And then you use that. I mean, you did it through all of those years up until you started working at WGN and had your own show. It was an overnight show eventually where you were on
Yeah.
for how many years on the overnight show? Like number
Well,
one rated. Like
it,
working at WGN wasn't. It was a big deal. Like
it
so,
was,
it was
and
a
the only
huge
reason
deal.
it was a massive, and it still is. I mean, it's not so much now with the way the station is, but back in the day, everybody listened to WGN.
Yeah.
Everybody did, and it was number one in the ratings every
Mhm.
month. It was not even a question. And in your house, especially if you were a Cub fan, and I grew up blocks away from Wrigley Field on
Mhm.
Addison.
Yeah,
You
that
had WGN on. You had WGN on 24/7 because you listened to the Cubs. You would listen to everything, and we knew all of the personalities that were on WGN. But the one that stood out for me was Roy Leonard. Roy Leonard,
Mm.
who this book is dedicated to. My book, 40 Years, 40 Films, is dedicated
Yep,
to
right
the
in the
late
front
great
cover
Roy
there. I
Leonard.
saw it.
Yeah, and I could, because I would not have a career without him. I wouldn't have anything without him. I never would have had a career at WGN. I never would have been a part of WGN without Roy Leonard. I never would have become a film critic without Roy Leonard. So when I first started, I was my overnight show. I got the overnight show. I started doing overnights on weekends and fill-ins in 1998. That
Okay.
was the year that Roy Leonard retired. When Roy announced his retirement, well, he didn't announce it to the public right away, but when he told those close to him, myself included, that he was going to retire at the end of 1998, I was brought into the office of the program director at WGN, who at that time was Mary June Rose.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I don't know if this is the stupidest move I've ever made as a program director, but we don't want to lose you here at WGN, or at least I don't want to lose you here at WGN. Since Roy is retiring, we still want you to be a part of it. So you'll continue your Saturday morning movie reviews and whoever takes over the Saturday show is going to do that. And at that point, it switched around a lot, but at that point, John Williams took over.
Oh,
And so for the
because that was
Saturday show,
early in his tenure too.
it was. John got
Yeah.
there in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
I want to say. I think he got there in the mid 90s. I'd been there maybe 10, 11 years when John showed up, but from Minnesota. But
Mhm.
but anyway, when they announced, so I went in and I got the gig, and so I started doing overnights, having my own show in May of 1998, and they teamed me up with a guy named Gary Lee Wright, who Mary June wanted me to be teamed up with somebody who knew what they were doing. I had never hosted a radio show before. At this point, I was a frequent guest on every single show on WGN. Like, people at WGN knew who I was. So when Roy retired, by the time Roy retired in 1998, I had started in 1985. And so I had 13 years under my belt.
Yeah, that's a good run for anybody.
As a movie critic and a frequent guest on everybody's shows for every single day part, especially like overnights with Steve and Johnny, and every week.
I produced for them as well.
You produced for Steve and Johnny, yeah.
I have, yeah.
So then I got the gig in 1998. They teamed me up with Gary Lee Wright, who was a radio veteran who did Morning Drive at XRT for many years.
Oh yeah.
And we had a show called the Nick D. Gary Lee Show, and then a couple of months later, I got the Nick at Night show on Friday, and then eventually I was doing all weekend. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, overnights, and then I was filling in during the week whenever they needed me, and I did that up until 2013. And then in 2013, I finally got the overnight show 5 nights a week, and did that from 2013 to 2020 when I was let go. So yeah, I mean, it all started in '98 was when I got the first hosting gig that I got. It's actually in the book too. In 1998, I talk about like, wow, I was really excited. I teamed up with this guy Gary Lee Wright, and then it just kind of took off from there. And my weekend shows became huge and really really popular. They were number one. And then eventually, when I got the overnight full time in 2013, it was also the number one show, and I was leading to Steve Cochran's Morning Drive show at that time.
Yeah.
It was great. It was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, when I first got the full show on my own, hosting was back in 1998. Yeah, so
I remember being at where this radio station was still on Michigan Avenue at 435 North Michigan, and I remember you'd walk around that first floor, and there were the big old studio that was kind of in the middle of the building. Then you had
the AC combo.
Yeah, and then you had the Michigan Avenue, this studio, showcase studio. Yeah, that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember like getting ready for a show, and I did a lot of stuff with Brian Noonan. He had a show at some point, but I would hear your show because it was on. Because people don't know this, but at radio stations, they play the radio station at the radio station.
Yeah, it's simulcast throughout the offices and everywhere.
Yeah, a lot of people like tell that. Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, I never thought that. I'm like, yeah, that's like, working at a record company. They probably have, their records playing in the office.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I remember always hearing your show, and then all of a sudden you hear drunks in the nude. And then you would, oh my God.
In the news.
In the news. Yeah. And I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. And I just was like, I am so at home. I can't even begin to tell you.
That was a segment that got a huge response from people. Because we would get these stories, at that time, Andy Herman was my producer.
Andy.
Yeah. Andy Herman was my producer during that time period. And Mike Steven, who is also, who just celebrated his 1000th, episode of Outside the Loop Radio, which he still does on Sunday mornings on GN. Great
That's
guy.
amazing.
And then I had other producers during the course of that time that worked with me and stuff, over the years. But Andy Herman was the main producer that I had, and until I got the full time gig, and then it was Dan Shagru. But Andy, and we would come up with these segments that we did, and we would do Straight Out of Context, which was a segment where people would listen to the radio station 24/7, and whenever anybody said something that you can pull out of context and it sounds dirty, people would jot down the day and the time, and then we would play it back. So it would be like, I don't know. The funniest ones were like when Milt Rosenberg was on. Like Milt would say something that sounded dirty, and we'd play it back and we'd laugh like 2-year-olds. And we also did the Pat and Ron highlight reel. Which was people listening to Cubs games, and then we would play back the highlights of Pat and Ron being hilarious in the thing. And then Drunks in the News was something we did because like we would look through news stories every week and during the week, and everybody did. There were so many stories in the news about people who would do stupid shit when they were drunk.
Mm-hmm.
So we just started to read those and do it with. And then when in 2015, when I got sober, in 2015, I changed that to. You Big Dummy. We changed that to the dummy. So You Big Dummy. So I didn't do stories about drunks anymore because I found it a little exploitive and not quite fair on my part to like make fun of people who were drinking because I had a problem. So anyway, we changed it to You Big Dummy, but it was just dumb people doing, and by the way, there wasn't a shortage of those stories.
No, there's no shortage of that. I was about to say
because people do stupid stuff when they're drunk and when they're sober. So we found that out and went, yeah, people don't have to be drunk to do idiotic things. So yeah, but that was a fun segment. That was a really fun segment to do on the show.
Yeah, I mean, WGN was a place where they let you do your thing, and they somehow had a way of cultivating what Chicago is, right? Like you mentioned, WGN was on all the time. Especially if you're a Cubs fan, it just stayed on because why wouldn't you just leave it on? I remember it keep my grandparents company because they didn't have a TV for a long time. They had the radio on, and I'm talking years ago, but that's what it was like.
But that's what GN was. It was live and local 24/7. That's not what it is now. Not at all. If you turn it on now after 10 o'clock, forget it. It's syndicated nonsense, and it's also very, very, very right wing and all that stuff. And the thing about GN back in the day when it was the glorious GN, and that history, should be honored. Um,
Mhm.
every host and every single person, it felt like a family, even if you disagree politically, because Kathy and Judy were as to the left as you could possibly get. Spike O'Dell was also to the right, but they were really
Mhm.
good friends and they could talk
Yeah.
about it and have fun with it. Now it's completely divisive. And well, that's kind of the state of things in the world as they are anyway. But back then, you could have whatever, and GN represented everybody. Like you could listen to it. It didn't matter what your politics were. GN was like family, and it was live, it was local, and it was 24 hours. And if you needed anything at any time, you could turn on WGN and you can call. That was
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I loved Roy so much, was because at the time when I was listening to Roy, and I was a kid when I started listening to Roy, I was a film fanatic, and I knew Gene and Roger from reading their stuff in the Sun Times and watching them on TV and so on and so forth. And I knew, other film critics and stuff. But Roy, you could call him. You could call him because of WGN. Like literally, you can call him and get on the air and talk to Roy. He was accessible. So, like as a kid, I would call him up and go, "Why didn't you like Caddyshack?" and do stuff like that. And then he and I would get into a conversation. You couldn't do that with Gene and Roger. You couldn't do that with any other film critics or anything. But you could do that with GN, and that's why people felt so connected to the station. There was a period of time when
Yeah.
you felt like family. And I'll tell you something, Tom. When I was doing overnights at GN, I was offered other day parts. I was offered middays. I was offered afternoon drive, and I turned them down. And I
Hmm.
stayed on the overnights because it's a really, really important day part for me. I love the people who work on the overnights, and I got connected to them. They were my
Mhm.
people. And like you said, people, you mentioned that older people, they didn't have TVs, grandparents didn't have TVs and stuff. Well, there are a lot of people in the middle of the night who are up and need company. So
Yeah.
my
100%.
audience consisted not just of regular listeners and really cool, but people who were working all night. Maybe they were security guards or something, or they worked all night at a gas station or something like that, and they needed entertainment, or they were up because they were insomniacs and they couldn't sleep, or they had a baby that they had to take care of, or they were sick, or they were old. Whatever it was, um, WGN and the overnight shift in particular crossed over into that line where we became friends, where we literally were part of their
Absolutely.
lives. And I never ever downplayed that. Like I respected that. I still to this day, whenever I get emails from people, and there are a lot of people who listen to my podcast only late at night. You can listen to a podcast obviously anytime, but there are people who are like, nope, I can't listen to you unless the lights are out and it's dark. And I'm like, that's cool, that's totally cool. But no, I mean,
That is
and
cool.
GN did have that. There was a period of time when, well, a long, long period of time when WGN had the history and the heritage and the reputation of being part of your family, where you were invited in and accepted. And that's one of the things that I love the most about the heyday of GN and my days there. I loved
Yeah.
that.
And you capture that as you read through your book, you get that vibe, you feel that, and you also do that with yourself. And I think that's the thing that separates most any television or radio stations from WGN radio is that you to be successful you put yourself out there, and you
Yeah.
did that on the air. And that's you probably got into many of conversations about movies that you liked, that other people liked, or the rest of the world thought the movie was great and you thought it was garbage, and all the way up into going through the things you had to go through with what happened in 2020. It was 2021 when WGN decided to make changes. You were very
It was
vulnerable in your book.
2020. It was 2020. The
20,
changes
yeah,
started. The changes started in 2019. But everything really should. And it was not only did these massive changes happen at WGN, all for the bad. Like people were getting fired left and right. People who actually understood the radio station and what
Mhm.
it was and its history and had respect for it. Those people were being shown the door. And on top of that, COVID was happening. Like we were getting
Yeah.
nailed by COVID, and the entire world shut down. And I was the only person at that time. I literally was the only person at the station who was coming in to do their show. Everybody else was doing it from home. Everybody else was doing it remotely. But I went in there when the city was locked down, and I couldn't. Sometimes I couldn't get to the station because the bridges were up. There was that period of time in
Oh
in
yeah.
2020 when people were busting out windows on Michigan Avenue and they shut down the loop completely. I would have to find my way down there, and there were a couple of nights when I couldn't do it, and I had to call the program director and say, "Look, the bridges are up. I can't swim, across." I would have been able to get in there if we were still in the Trib building. But when they moved
Yeah.
over to Wacker on the other side, I couldn't get there. So, but anyway, on top of all the weird, horrible changes that were happening behind the scenes at WGN, initiated by people that don't know what the hell they're doing, we had COVID, and that I believe COVID, I think, delayed my firing. I really do.
Yeah.
I think I would have been. Oh yeah, I think I would have been fired much sooner had COVID not happened. But because COVID was happening, and I was there every night, they were like, "Well, let's just let this guy that we're going to fire work for a few more months because he is working, and we can't hire anybody right now because nobody's going to want to work." But anyway, but yeah. So in addition to all the changes, like COVID happened, it was just a horror. 2020 was a horrible year. Um, um, yeah, in general, in my life and
Mhm.
everything, and it's weird too because the movie that I chose in the book as my favorite movie is probably the darkest and most depressing and most twisted film in the entire book, and it just so happened to come out that year. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that makes sense. And that's the other thing that while I was putting this book together,
The Lodge, right?
yeah, The Lodge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as dark and depressing and as isolating as you can possibly get. And I look back and I'm like, well, of course that was my favorite movie of the year. And that was the thing about when I put this book together, you know, making each movie that I write about from each year as a
Mhm.
professional film critic personal and adding my own personal story to it and connection where I was in my life at that time. I really did discover like, yeah, it totally makes sense that I chose that specific movie that year because of the stuff that I was going through in my personal life and because of things that were happening. I mean, there were a few movies that I chose after I got sober that I might not have chosen, or at least I would have looked at differently if I had continued to drink. You know, like
Yeah.
my outlook on life completely changed when I got sober. And because your outlook on life changes, the way that you know, consume art and consume movies or whatever, that changes as well. And that's all it's all documented in the book. And as I would go back and proofread the book and you know, do rewrites and edit it and stuff like that, because there were only two of us that rewrote, you know, that edited this book. It was just me and
Oh,
Julie. You know, we got sick of reading.
really? Wow.
I know that Julie got sick of reading it. I know Julie thinks, Jesus. But like we went through it and you know, and would rewrite it. I would edit it, change it, make any corrections that needed to be corrected. But upon going back and looking at it, it all kind of fell into place. Like it was a big realization for me. I was like, oh yeah, now I kind of understand more why I like the movies that I liked during my life. And it's all in the book.
That's fantastic, and I imagine therapeutic for you to do all of
Completely.
that. Yeah, especially, you know, it's always fun to look back on the easy stuff or the fun times, right?
Yeah.
But to go back and look at where, you know, perhaps, you know, there's a date that where things fell apart officially, right? Everybody has that date where things just go sideways.
Yeah.
But if you look back before that, you're like, well, that's kind of where it actually started to, you know, you reflect on that time where you're like, well, that's when shit really started going sideways. But this is where it culminated, and this is where I figured it out, and this is my triumph return, you know?
Yeah, and that's all in the book, you know, it all and I didn't mean to do I don't think I meant to do that. It just kind of naturally happened. Like I as I was putting it together, because I you know, at first I didn't write these reviews in order. Like it's not like I sat down and I wrote because Lost in America is the first review in the book because that's the
Hmm.
first, you know, my favorite film of 1985, the first year that I was a film critic is Albert Brooks's Lost in America. That's not the first
Yeah.
review I wrote for this book. I kind of jumped around and then I put them all together. And as I was putting them all together, and stringing them together on what was happening, and then thinking back to what was happening in 1990 or what was happening in 2002, or you know, like these places, remembering the details and then forgetting things and then going back to and adding stuff. I was like, okay, no, now I understand that this, and it became like this autobiography, like of a journey. And so I wasn't really intending on doing the first five chapters. There are five chapters before the actual movie reviews begin. And I
Hmm.
at first I wasn't going to include that, but then I did. So the five chapters at the beginning are actually from birth, like my birth through my complete obsession with movies up until I got the phone call from Roy Leonard in 1985 saying, "Hey, well, why don't you join my show?" So all of that's in there. So it becomes like an autobiography from literally birth all the way through to the end of till today.
And at the beginning of this, before you were hopped on, I had read the last sentence in the book because I find it so Chicago in very poetic way, but simple. It says, "Oh, and Nick loves Chicago and everything about it." And I've
Yeah,
said that to so many people before about like, no, they're like, "What? What do you? I don't understand. What do you love about Chicago?" I'm like, "I love everything about Chicago." They're like,
yeah,
"But what does that even mean?" I'm like, I don't know. I love the traffic. I love the trains. I love, you know, a crappy day when rain's dripping off the L and you can walk into a pool hall and play pool or meet your friend, you know, like whatever, summers, you know, like what's not to love, you know? and you either get it or you don't.
Yeah, well, it's hard for me to be objective about it because I've never lived anywhere else, and I've never lived in the suburbs. I'm 60 years old. I've lived in the city of Chicago my entire life, and so what I love about Chicago is everything, and all of its flaws, and all of the
Yeah,
all of the weirdness, and all of the the weird politics of this city, and the weird
and
stuff
they
that's
are weird.
happened. It's a beautiful, flawed, crazy city. It's also it just so happens to be, my home. I couldn't think of living anywhere else. I couldn't imagine it. And I also, uh, I honestly couldn't imagine living in the suburbs.
I mean, neither.
Yeah, and it's the city. I mean, I have to be a part of the city, and I don't know what it is. I think that's a universal thing. If you're a Chicagoan, there's just like an unspoken thing that we all have as Chicagoans.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I feel like people, when they talk about like their favorite hot dog stand, they'll talk about ones that you've
Gene and
never
Jude,
heard
by
of.
the way. It's Gene and Jude's.
Gene and Jude's. I'm partial to Super Dog. I live blocks from it. I can walk to Super Dog, which is
The pizza.
barely in the city limits, but it is
Yep.
in the
But
city
it's there.
limits.
It's near Schiller Park, but it's still Chicago.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you mentioned earlier when you were talking about, you've moved on from the radio thing to podcasting now, and you do these events. Where can people find out where you're at now outside of the book, and you have a
Well,
website and things like that?
the website is the website, man. I love doing this website. And again, this is because of Julie, man. Julie's like, let's do a website. What the hell? What's stopping you? And I'm like, all right. Julie, not only is she an amazing person, and I love her deeply, but she's really good at kicking me in the ass, and going, come on, you know. But there's this
We need
website that I
those.
do. It's called nickdigilio.com, and I review weekly all of the movies that come out. I review them there. I have a blog where I write about everything. I write about pop culture and movies and entertainment. Whatever I feel like writing about, I write about. There are also links to all my podcasts. I do 2 podcasts. I have 2 different podcasts that I do. There are links at nickdigilio.com where you can get them. The 2 podcasts that I do are the Nick D podcast, which is very much like my old radio show. I have a lot of my regular guests that were guests on my radio show. It drops twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays, new episodes, and these are all from Radio Misfits Podcast Network, the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, which is an amazing podcast network that's run by a wonderful guy named Ed Silla. Ed is a tremendous guy, and I wouldn't have been able to do or learn anything about podcasts without him. I owe him immensely for helping me out and putting me on his network at a time when I was just kind of not knowing what I was going to do next, in that funk between being fired and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Ed was like, come on over to Radio Misfits. So I love Radio Misfits. They're fantastic. So check out radiomisfits.com. And in addition to my podcast, there are so many other great podcasts. Rick Kempfer and David Stern have a podcast there called The Minutia Men. And they happen to be the publishers of this book. So
I was going to say, Rick, also Radio Roots that run deep with Rick as well.
Man. Yeah, no, that's a guy who's been in the radio business for years. I mean, he wrote an amazing book called The Loop Files about the Loop, the radio station, and that, of course, is Eckhart's Press. So, but they publish a book. But anyway, I'm with I'm part of a family at Radio Misfits that's amazing, and we all kind of support each other, and it feels like home. And then my other podcast that I do is called That Show Hasn't Been Funny in Years, an SNL podcast. Now, I wrote that ironically. That title is ironic because I love SNL and I watch it every week. And so the SNL podcast is up, and it's all about. I have guests. I've had people who have written. I've had cast members, and I also just do episodes about specific sketches or whatever. So it's a deep dive into Saturday Night Live, and that drops every Wednesday. So those 2 podcasts, the Nick D podcast and the Saturday Night Live podcast, 3 episodes a week of those podcasts combined at Radio Misfits and nickdigilio.com. And the screenings that I do, I used to host screenings at the Rosemont. It's now an AMC, the theater in Rosemont, the movie theater.
Oh yeah, with the reclining seats.
Yes, back when it was Movieco. Back when it was Movieco.
Oh yeah.
In like a.
I was just there this weekend. Yeah.
Were you? What'd you see?
My son wanted to see Now You See Me, Now You Don't.
Well, that explains why you went to see it.
The acting was not good.
Yeah.
I was really considering the people in the movie. I was like, "Why? This is hot garbage. This acting's going it's just really disappointing."
It seemed to me like it was a paycheck. But Jesse Eisenberg just biding time so he can do another great movie like A Real Pain, which he really
that's kind of the vibe. I mean, the graphics weren't great either. I was like, "Wow, it's like I'm watching a movie from 2007." It's
Right.
just,
Right.
whatever. But my
Well,
son loved it, so that's all that mattered
so
to
I
me.
started. That's cool. Your son liked it. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
So I started hosting stuff at the Movie Co Theater in Rosemont, and I did that for about 9 years. And then COVID happened, like right before COVID, right around 2018, 19. Those stopped, and then I hooked up with Mike Schindler, who is a programmer at the Classic Cinemas. Classic
Mm.
Cinemas is the company that runs the Lake Theater in Oak Park, and they're incredibly open to anything that I want to show, and they're really great. They're wonderful people, and the Lake Theater is a beautiful theater.
Yeah, I've
So
been
every
there.
month, the second Wednesday of each month, I host screenings, and I've been doing that for about almost 2 years, and so every month, the second Wednesday of each month, like this one coming up, December 10th, I am hosting a screening of Batman Returns with
Mm.
Michael Keaton, Danny DeVito as the Penguin, Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. Not only is it a
Oh,
great
yeah.
Batman movie, but it's also a great Christmas movie, which is why I'm hosting it in December. And now, from now on, I'm going to be bringing books with me. I will be bringing 40 Years, 40 Films, and I'll be selling and signing them on site. I'll be at a table, and I'll sign them for you. I ran out of books at the last screening, at my very first time doing it. My
Good for
last screening
you.
I was stunned. My last screening was Brian De Palma's crazy sex thriller, Body Double.
Oh, yeah.
And we had an okay sized crowd, but I ran out of books. I was, wow. I mean, I was like, wow, this is amazing. So that was my official first book signing, was the Body Double screening. And
Wow.
I sold out of books. And so on December 10th, I'll be showing Batman Returns at the Lake Theater in Oak Park. You can go to classiccinemas.com/Nick to get tickets, and I'll be selling books there. But the big launch party that we're doing is on Friday, December 12th.
Okay.
And it is between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. It's the official book launch party. Like, the publishers will be there, friends, family. I hope everybody shows up. Hope you guys all show up. It's free to get in, and it's from 6 to 8 p.m. and it's at Kaiser Tiger, which is a really cool
Oh,
restaurant bar at 1415 West Randolph.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I did a
it's a
segment there.
Yeah, well, there you go. Kaiser
Yeah.
Tiger, you know the place. It's
Mhm.
fantastic. And so Friday, December 12th is my official launch party, and I really want people to show up, and I hope everybody can show up. Tom, I hope you can come. Bring family, bring friends. I will be selling and signing books and taking pictures, and I'll be speaking. So it's the big official launch party. That's when it becomes like really real. And then, of course, David and Rick like to remind me that it's perfect timing for that, because during the holidays people like to buy gifts for people,
Yeah. And,
and
you
this
can
book would make a fine gift. So yeah,
nice stocking stuffer if you have
yeah.
right over the whole thing.
But those are the big things that are happening. But seriously, if you want, you want to keep tabs on whatever I'm doing, events, podcasts, writing, book events, all that stuff, screenings, nickdigilio.com. I mean, that's the headquarters for all of it, nickdigilio.com.
Man, it sounds to you like you're busier now than you were when you were doing the overnights, because now you have your nights free for the most
I
part,
do.
right? Like
I
you're
do.
getting
Yeah.
real sleep for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. I barely get sleep, but anyway, yeah. No, it's been an interesting time. There's some up and down things that were going on in my life. From what was going on with GM when I was let go, and then on a personal note, some really hairy and crazy stuff happened with my folks. Anybody who have elderly parents know that sometimes it's a struggle, sometimes it's a nightmare. And there was a
Mhm.
period of time, like right after I got fired and I started to do the podcast and things started to move along, where everything got derailed by some really horrible stuff involving my folks. I'm not going to get into detail, but those things are roadblocks, and you got to get past them. All of
Yeah.
that stuff, you got to get past them. And this, to me, represents me getting past all of that crap that was thrown in front of me, and having this book out. It symbolically means a lot, and I also think, and I'm also really proud of the book too.
You should be. I mean, it's your life's work right there, and
Thank you.
you were vulnerable in talking about it, and coming on here and talking about it, and being so open. And I'm so happy to have seen this come my way. I was actually emailing Rick about something else, because I've interviewed him for the Loop book, and he's like, "Oh, I think this one might be right up your alley," and he sent
Yeah,
me a link to the book, and I was like, "Of course!"
yeah.
Like, I produce for Nick. I mean, I'm not very often. It was like part
No,
time here
I
and there,
remember,
but
Matt. No, I remember working with you. Yeah. No, it's always great.
yeah.
I loved working with there were a lot of like radio personalities and people who host shows. I'm not going to name names, but there are a lot of hosts who treat their producers like shit, and I've seen that.
Uh-huh.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I've seen that, and I hate that. And I always became friends with my producers and whoever was filling in. Like if you filled in or anybody else filled in, a lot of the fill-in producers, we got along famously
Yeah.
because like I get your gig, man. I know what your job is. You don't have to be here. You know what I mean? Like and sometimes it would be people who were like interning and they would just throw them on my show because it was late at night. And everybody, for me, we're all in the same boat, man. Everybody gets treated exactly the same way. We're all trying to just do a cool and entertaining radio show. Let's all do it. You know, that's kind of the attitude that I had about it.
Yep, and that's exactly what I remember. And you were candid when you were going through some of your issues on social media. I remember reading about it and always just wishing you well. And again, like those are things that I have taken in my career of like, you know, let people in a little bit as much as it's healthy for you. You know, obviously there's that line where you got to just be careful, but
Yeah.
when you are careful with it and it's healthy for you, it's good to just be a little vulnerable and show that you're a human being. So
Yeah.
I wish you nothing but the best in all
Well,
of what
thanks,
you're
man.
doing. You sound like you're doing a ton.
Well, yeah,
And
I'm keeping busy, and you know,
yeah,
the other thing about this book that I'm really thrilled about is that a lot of people who have been like, I'm getting feedback now because it just came out just a couple of weeks ago. It came out, and now I'm starting
yeah,
to get feedback from people, and everybody is like, "Well, here's the thing. One of the things I love most about the book is that there are all of my top 10 lists are in it
yeah,
from 1985 to 2024. So there are 400 movies, you know, like listed in here. And so you could like, when you go through and you read what you want, a lot of people are like jotting down titles or marking it off in the book. Like, I got to rent this one. I got to see this one. And
yeah.
that thrills me because there are some movies in here that I write about that some people have never even heard of that were my favorite movies of the year. And I've got some odd choices in here. And not
Mhm,
by,
mhm.
you know, I didn't do that on purpose. That's just the way it worked out. But a lot of people are like, "Wow, I never heard of that movie." And then people are always talking about. People have been talking about now about how much they love the fact that there are so many movies mentioned in here that they will see that they haven't seen before. So that makes me feel happy when I can turn people on to some stuff that they haven't seen. And apparently the book is loaded with that. There's a lot of movies in here that people have never seen. So I'm happy with
Well, yeah, and if anybody has been digging around on any streaming platform, you realize that not all the movies are there. You know what I
that.
mean?
Yeah,
Like
it's
there's
true.
so much that's not there.
It's
So if
true.
you can find it, if you find things like, you know, your book and you find movies that perhaps are not where you would readily find them, but you go on a little journey or you go like there are still some video stores that exist in the city that pride themselves on having those movies
Yeah.
on a, you know, on a Blu-ray, you know, where you can watch it. Now you got to have a Blu-ray player, but
Right.
either way,
Right.
it's still cool. I don't know. I love all of it. I think it's we need to hold on to that stuff so we don't forget who we are when as the years roll by. So
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, that's the message that's meant to come from the book. So that makes me happy.
well, Nick, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. I know you got a concert to go to tonight, so I'll bid
Yeah.
adieu. But man, oh man, it was a lot of fun.